All right, good morning. Let's get started. We have an exciting panel this morning. My name is Peter Hotez, and I'll be moderating, and I'll be speaking third. But our first speaker this morning is Professor Scott McNabb, who's a professor from the Riyadh School of Public Health at Emory University. And he's also connected with the King Saud bin Abdulaziz University as well. So, Dr. McNabb, please come up.
I'd like to talk a little bit today about research integrity. And I'm going to define research integrity as virtue that is circumscribed by guidelines. And so let's talk, first of all, I'm from Atlanta, which is the home of Coca-Cola, home of CNN, the world's largest aquarium, and also our university is directly located next to our CDC. So a disappointed salesman of Coca-Cola returned from his Middle Eastern assignment in Saudi Arabia. A friend asked, "Why weren't you successful with the Saudis?" The salesman explained, "When I got posted in the Middle East, I was very confident that I'd make a good sales pitch, as Coca-Cola was virtually unknown there. But I had a problem. I didn't know how to speak Arabic. So I planned to convey the messages through 3 posters. The first poster, the man is lying in the hot desert sand, totally exhausted and fainting. The second poster, the man is drinking a cola. And the third poster, the man is now totally refreshed." So those posters were placed everywhere. "That should have worked," said the friend. But the salesman replied, "My problem was that I didn't know that Arabic was read from right to left." So today I'd like to tell you a parable. It's a parable of the mirror and the sea. A mirror in a distant land was growing old, and he was ready to choose his successor. So he decided to call all the young people together in his land one day. He said, "It's time for me to step down and to choose the next emir. But I have decided to choose one of you." So the youth were shocked. The emir continued, "I'm going to give each one of you a seed today. And I want, it's a very special seed, and I want you to plant your seed, water it, and come back here after 1 year with what you have grown. So I'll judge the plants and choose one of you to be the next emir." So one boy, Ahmed, was there that day. He, like the others, received the seed. He was very excited. And he told his mother the story. So she helped him get a pot and plant some soil. And he planted the seed. Every day he would water it and give it enough sunlight. And he checked to see if it had grown. 3 weeks go by, nothing. Some boys talk about the grown plants. 4 weeks go by, nothing. By now, everyone is talking about it. 6 months go by, nothing. Everybody else had very tall plants. But Ahmed had nothing. So Ahmed stayed quiet around the seed, and he waited. 1 year goes by. Ahmed did not want to take the empty pot to the emir because he felt embarrassed and not to fail. But his mother convinced him to go anyway. So when Ahmed arrived at the palace, he saw plants of all sizes and shapes. Humiliated, Ahmed stood in the back of the crowd, and the emir said, "What great plants, trees, and flowers you have grown. Today one of you will be appointed the next emir." The emir spotted Ahmed and his empty pot in the back. He ordered his royal guards to bring him up front, and Ahmed was terrified. The emir asked, "What's your name?" "Ahmed, sir," the boy replied meekly. The emir looked to the crowd and announced, "Here is your new emir. His name is Ahmed." Everyone was shocked. The emir said, "1 year ago today, I gave everyone here a seed, and I told you to take the seed, plant it, to water it, and to bring it back to me. But I gave you boiled seeds, which would not grow. All of you except Ahmed have brought me trees and flowers and plants. When you found that the seed would not grow, you substituted another seed for the one I gave you. Ahmed was the only one with the courage and the honesty to bring me back a pot with my seed in it. Therefore, he is the one who will feed you a meal. The moral of the story is if you plant honesty, you will reap trust. If you plant goodness, you will reap friends. If you plant humility, you will reap greatness. Perseverance, you will reap victory, consideration, harmony, hard work, and success. But if you reap dishonesty, if you sow dishonesty, you will reap distrust. If you sow selfishness, you will reap loneliness, pride, destruction, greed, loss, bitterness, isolation, laziness, and stagnation. So today I'd like to talk about the fact that the lotus is a symbol of knowledge and purity of the body, speech, and word. And while rooted in the night, its flowers blossom very beautifully on long stalks as they grow above these muddy waters of attachment and desire. In a similar fashion, science has the capacity for great beauty, but we must rise above our own human weaknesses. The objectives of this presentation are to talk about what does research integrity mean, why do scientists engage in misconduct, and how can we promote virtue? So let's talk a little bit about what is research integrity. Research integrity can be defined as the active adherence to ethical principles and professional standards. Our U.S. National Academy of Sciences describe it this way, that integrity is an aspect of moral character and experience. It involves, above all, a commitment to intellectual honesty and personal responsibility for one's actions and to a range of practices that characterize responsible research conduct. So this means honesty and fairness, accuracy and fairness, proficiency and fairness, collegiality, disclosure of conflicts of interest, protection of human subjects, humane care of animals, and adherence to the mutual responsibilities of mentors and trainees. What are the elements of professionalism? Intellectual honesty is a key component of professionalism, excellence in thinking and doing, collegiality and openness, autonomy and taking responsibility, and self-regulation. So I'd like to conduct a poll. This is your poll, so please raise your hand how many of you have experienced or know someone who has faced one or more of the following? Please raise your hand. Making up results and reporting them. Raise your hand. Manipulating research. Keep your hand up, please. Manipulating research or omitting data. Misappropriating credit. Intimidating or mistreating a subordinate. Undeserved authorship. Everybody's hand should go up, I think. Okay, so we know that we're experiencing these elements of what we would call the lack of integrity. There are major categories of scientific misconduct. First is fabrication, making up data. The second is falsification, distorting data. And the third is what's known as plagiarism, or copying information from another source without giving the proper attribution. There are other types of misconduct, including violation of ethical standards regarding human and animal experiments. We've been working very closely with the IRBs and various institutions here to protect human subjects research. Ghost writing, someone writing an article and for another scientist. Gift authorship, the giving of an authorship of a manuscript just because you're on an editorial board or that you have some position of power. Suppression of conflicts of interest, or predatory journals. There are different, we'll discuss a little bit of each of those. So I think based on our poll here, 1 of 3 scientists admit to either using questionable research practices or having experienced them in the workplace. And I think everyone raised their hand in our initial poll. The popular view is that these are just a few bad apples, but the reality is that we're looking at, in essence, the known frauds, which are really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a vast majority of misconduct which goes unnoticed and unreported. So let's talk about fabrication and falsification. There is a small proportion of manuscripts in the literature that are fraudulent. I think everyone is aware of the fraudulent manuscript which attributed autism to MMR. And we know how the devastation that has done. In the United States, there are still young women and mothers and fathers who believe that MMR will cause autism, so they do not have their children vaccinated, which is a false premise based on fabrication of information in the literature. And you probably all know the story of how the co-authors withdrew themselves. Finally, the journal withdrew the paper, and there was the admission of this fabrication of data, which caused such a disruption in the public health area. 8 out of 800 papers submitted to the Journal of Cell Biology had digital images that had been improperly manipulated. So at Emory, when we teach our students about attributing intellectual property, every image they take from the internet or every photo that they make has to have the right attribution given to it. Between 0.3 and 4.9% of scientists say they have fabricated or falsified research data or altered or modified the results to improve the outcome, and a proportion of those have personal knowledge of a colleague who fabricated or falsified data. So this is an issue in our culture, fabrication and falsification, 44%. We have seen a 44% increase in the number of published papers just in the last 2 decades, from 1,200% increase in published retractions in the scientific literature over the past decade. Peter is the editor of the journal, and I'm sure he has his own stories to tell about this. Around half of those retractions are suspected cases of misconduct. So why we have to think about what's going on in the scientific community. If you look at the rise of retractions, for example, you can see this amazing increase, not only in the number of publications, but the number of publications that have been retracted, presumably because of misconduct. And we all know and feel the pressure of publishing. It's here more intensely than I've ever experienced it in the last 5 years. The pressure to publish is really remarkable. If you look at the elements of misconduct, we're talking about plagiarism, honesty errors, and others. There are definitely areas of misconduct. And there's a whole spectrum of journals that have retracted. This is a graphic which shows the retraction notices from the Web of Science and by journal. So you can see this has become an increasing problem. If you think about plagiarism, which is probably the most common and the oldest scientific misconduct, when the Saudi physicians come to our university, and we have a collaboration with the Ministry of Health, they are put into an environment pressured to do papers and studies. And so my 5 rules are: 1, don't cheat, which means that if you're going to the internet to get information, you have to get the proper attribution to whoever owns that intellectual property. So our university uses a software tool that looks at plagiarism for all homework assignments. So it's an awareness issue. Many types of plagiarism, including this is a map of plagiarism by region and country. There are articles in all sorts of journals. In 2002, an anonymous survey of over 3,000 researchers asked them to admit to questionable behavior. 4.7 admitted to repeated publication of the same results, to plagiarism. And so these are the suspected duplicate manuscripts in the biomedical literature. There is currently now in Saudi Arabia the specific event of 2 people reportedly publishing the same information in reputable journals. So this is not a problem that anyone in our culture, scientific culture, is immune to. Survey of over 60,000 undergraduate students and 9,000 revealed that 62% of them had engaged in cut and paste plagiarism at least once in the last 3 years. So this becomes an important part of my obligation as an academic teacher to help teach my students the value of intellectual honesty, to be able to understand how to attribute intellectual property to other persons. The consequences of scientific misconduct is damage, not only to your reputation, to your career, to the relationships that you have in the community, but also to the image of the field. And it hurts people. It hurts the scientific process, the quality of evidence. It hurts people. And so it's a dishonor to be able to be involved in this type of activity. The consequences are devastating. over 43 scientists with established careers who were officially found guilty of misconduct by U.S. Office of Research Integrity. Over half of them received 3-year disbarments from obtaining grants and contracts. 16 out of 37 of those traceable were still employed in academia. So it's an enormous stain on your career and on the field. And there are direct costs to this. One paper attributed over $500,000 to the direct to the investigation of the phases of the review process. So why do scientists engage in misconduct? I think there's no simple answer. It's complicated. There are 3 distinct narratives. The first is individual impurity, where the responsibility of misconduct lies with the individual. The second, institutional impropriety, where the responsibility of misconduct lies with the institution. And the third is some sort of a structural crisis. Responsibility lies with the process of research itself. For individuals, if you think about the causes of alleged misconduct, these are quotes from individuals who have been caught, if you will, in the act. I didn't believe that the environment in which I work was responsible for what I've done. Competition for limited research funds among research investigators is a necessary part of federally funded scientific work. Neither this nor competition for major awards in science can be implicated as an important factor in my particular instance. An honest investigator should be able to deal effectively with the traditional publish or perish pressures. The loss of my ability to be an objective scientist cannot be linked to defects in the system under which I work. So he was admitting individual responsibility. There are cultural factors, there are situational factors, loss of family members, pressures in the family as well as in the institution. These are all reported factors for individual failings. So who is committing these acts? If you look at this, it's 39% fabrication, 37% fabrication and falsification, stratified by academic title, assistant professors, associate professors, full professors, department heads, graduate students, postdocs, techs, others. Everybody is involved in this effort. And they're not distinct based on your affiliation or your graduate degree, MDs and PhDs. So we know the pressure to publish. What caused the misconduct? One study, personal and professional stressors, stressful job, supervisor expectations, insecure position, overpressure, desire to succeed, to please others, many of them denied this injury. There are organizational climate factors which are relevant, and all of us in academia understand the pressure to publish. We have professional conflicts, insufficient supervision and mentoring. You have a lot of lab procedures that are undertaken, etc. And job insecurities, which is probably a primary one, which where you have the poor supervision and the competition for positions. And there is a language barrier, for sure, because the language of the scientific community is English. Many of my students, English is not their first language. So to be able to publish in English requires a very delicate understanding of the meaning and support by ESL instructors who don't change the content, but help the scientists phrase information properly. So they can be competitive. Rationalizations include a lot of things. Lack of control, jumping the gun. There are a lot of reasons why people will do this activity. Frustrated. It's a slippery slope. If you start one type of fabrication and you get away with it, there's a temptation to continue down that slippery slope. And there are personality factors. Whether you believe in science as a field of endeavor, or whether you believe it as a personal ethic. Are these bad people or just bad choices? I'd say it's still complicated. What do the accused scientists say about this? 28% deny it, 35% admit the wrongdoing, express remorse. 22% of the co-authors claim no involvement in the writing of the manuscript, said it was a joke, a bad game. I was unaware of the fact that I was required to take permission. I personally have experienced a situation where I was working on a study of cryptosporidiosis, which was the first time it was investigated in a laboratory setting, and my laboratory chief wanted to be a co-author on the paper. He required himself to be the last author in the paper, and he didn't have a clue about cryptosporidiosis. So after that, I left the lab because it was not an appropriate ethical thing for him to do. I've seen that over and over in these circumstances here, where a senior scientist who's not been involved in publication has a junior scientist, and they require themselves to be on the manuscripts just by virtue of their position. So let's question to fabricate or not to fabricate. There are elements of this quandary. The first is the opportunity, the second is rationalization, and third is pressure. So the opportunity exists. You have the keys to the data. Nobody else has the data. So it's sort of a secret situation. The second is that science requires passion. If you look at Stephen Hawking's statement, science is not only a discipline of reason, but also one of romance and passion. Certainly it's been my romance and passion through my career. But that doesn't mean that you are convinced of your own ideas and theories to the point that you would distort data. That, well, changing a few data points to support my theory, will it hurt or not? I also have a personal experience. When I was a graduate student working my doctorate, I published an article which was negative data refuting information that was present in the literature. I developed monoclonal antibodies in ELISA to pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, which was at the time diagnosed only by bronchial brushing. And so that was in contrast to the published literature, which said that you can detect antigenemia by counter-immunoelectrophoresis. So who do you think reviewed the manuscript that I presented, which showed that you could not detect antigenemia? It was the lady who published the positive results. And to her credit, she accepted the manuscript, realizing that when you go into science, you get what you get. If you do the scientific method, the outcomes are what you get. And so we basically refuted something that she had published in the literature as positive, but to her credit, with integrity, she looked at the methods, the approaches that I was using, and realized that they were proper and allowed the paper to be published. So each of us had these own circumstances of events with our peers or with our supervisors. There is this culture of newness, and if you look at the publish or perish landscape, there are currently published academic work that sustains one's career. You have to publish or perish. You have to publish to be able to get tenure in a university setting. Research funders and administrators set bars for you. You're evaluated in your performance by the number of manuscripts that you publish. So the pressure is there. For example, publishing 3 papers per year, including one in a prestigious journal with an impact factor of at least 5. So the very specific criteria that you have to achieve as an academic in order to stay in academia. So the pressure is great. So you have this sort of gauntlet of getting the paper into the press, right? And so you also have, if you don't publish, you end up perishing. Your career is over, or at least you're downsized to a lesser academic institution, if you will. So there is a culture of newness. You know what? I teach scientific writing. I just taught it in Kmart a few weeks ago, and journals receive manuscripts that are new and useful. Those are the 2 attributes of getting an article published: if it's new and if it's useful. So this idea of a strong publication bias, if it's not new or counterintuitive, then where do you publish it? Because the journals want these new, exciting articles which cut new ground. So you don't want to publish something that's already been published, it's already just collaborating somebody's work. Where is that likely to get published? It's not going to be in the top tier journals. So it undermines, in certain ways, I would argue, the scientific method, because we live on understanding of science and the world based on peer review. So there's an economics to this, too. If you look in the early part of the 1980s, people would ask, what's the paper about? In the 1990s, there's a different attitude. And the risk of getting caught was disproportionate to the reward. You were rewarded by publishing, and the risk of getting caught was less. In the 90s, where's the paper going to be published? So there's a shift from what you've published, what science you've done, to where is it going to be published. So isn't it a crazy idea that where you publish determines the value of your work? Does the where you publish, is that greater than what you published? That's the question that I would ask. I'm fortunate to have Peter here, who edits an important journal, and we can talk about this more. Can we trust scientists? That's what it comes down to, especially in the wake of the scandal with MMR. It's led to an artificial inflation of the impact factor and constrained access to knowledge, and there is the rise of predatory journals. So let's do another poll real quickly. What factors do you think most adversely affect scientific research integrity? Please raise your hand. To publish or perish, A. Culture of newness, B. Economics of science, C. Or some other factor. I think they all play a role. So how do we promote virtue? This is the last part of my presentation. Samuel Johnson wrote that integrity without knowledge is weak and useless, and knowledge without integrity is dangerous and dreadful. How do we recognize bad science? It's pretty clear. There are sensationalized headlines, misinterpreted results, underrepresented sample sizes, no control groups being used. Those are all elements of red flags for bad science. The most common way that we can promote virtue is through training. So it's been exciting for me to work in the various universities to think about training scientists on what does it take to publish properly, how do you respect the internal review board, what are the elements of scientific publication that would lead to research integrity. The advantages of training are demonstrated interest, it assures professional standards, there's a standard of conduct. The disadvantages are that sometimes there are few qualified instructors to teach scientific integrity, and it's difficult to motivate students because the pressure is so great. So is it working? Well, I'd say in some ways no, that we still see an alarming trend in retractions and research misconduct, but in some ways, yes, there's encouragement because there definitely is a greater awareness of the issues. I've had one of my 30 Saudi students has been caught in an honor code violation. So with our program, the King Abdullah Fellowship Program, if a student who comes to us from Saudi Arabia and is found to be guilty of an honor code violation, which means cheating, then that student is not invited back for next year because the level of dignity and integrity should be very high. So we have to work hard to train people what it means to cheat. Of course, there are courses on the web, there are electronic database systems. It means also the engagement of high-level administrators and a change in culture so that the bosses are not requiring their names to be on papers, that they're supporting the junior scientists in this effort, and a training of trainers. Definitely a political commitment. There are courses online. There's the CITI program, as well as other programs that teach research integrity. And in fact, there's a conference coming up in June in Rio, the fourth World Conference on Research Integrity. So there are places to go and resources. So let's take a poll, and I feel empathetic to this poor guy. His hands are real small. He can't raise his hands in class. So he thinks it's very unfair. Prior to this session, how many of you thought about research integrity? First of all, huh? Huh? Second, when I'm forced to think about it occasionally, live it, breathe it. How strong is your institutional commitment to research integrity? It's a question that all of us in academia should answer. Are there just volunteers to do this work? Is there one person dedicated to this with resources? Do you have a couple of staff and resources dedicated to this? Is there training in your institution around research integrity and scientific publications? Is it a high priority item? So let's get creative with positive reinforcements, first of all. There are posters that can be placed into the academic environment, notebooks that have integrity messages with them, so the culture changes. There's a 1-800 hotline even for reports. So I'd say that I'd like to thank you for letting me have the opportunity to present, and if you want to do discussion now or later, it's up to you.
Why don't we take a couple of questions now, then we'll have a panel discussion.
Okay.
It's open for one or two questions. I have a question. So one of the things that we noticed at PLOS, where I'm the editor, is that the problems have come in countries that have more recently instituted requirements for number of publications and impact factor. So, and we've argued at PLOS maybe to get away from impact factor as a requirement. We've been trying to get towards article-specific metrics as an alternative. And you've mentioned here in Saudi Arabia that here in the kingdom that there's been new pressures to publish in high-impact journals. Any thoughts on how to mitigate that?
I think it's a great solution. I mean, I think everyone here from Saudi Arabia knows the pressure that you experience. And it's a new pressure. I mean, it's only come really in the last 5 years. I've been working here for 8 years, and it wasn't so prevalent maybe 8 years ago, but now the pressure is enormous. And in the higher institutions, the junior scientists, the junior academicians don't know how to do research. They haven't been trained to research. They don't know exactly how to use the literature properly, and the pressure is enormous. Either they publish or else they're gone. And in fact, that's just too much pressure. I think one of the solutions is to look at the standards realistically, and then to do the training. We should be providing training in higher institutions about this.
Great, thank you very much.